To follow along with this, the files are in Dropbox here, and I'm going to put these in the chat here, or this link in the chat here, so you can get them. Let me go back here. So that link should take you to it. Of course, if you have access to the board, you can already click those and download the 4 different images there. So it should load up, and you should see 4 different images that you can download to use. These are in a 1:1 square ratio, so you can see that when you download them. Let me close this poll here. Okay, cool. So now that we got that situated there. Alright, so first thing here. So I have right up here at the top here, I got the title of switching to modeling layout. So this is going to be the first thing that we do. So I'm just gonna jump right into Cinema 4D, and I had it already open, of course. Okay, that's a good question. So you're gonna have time after my little lesson here to actually start working on the Scarecrow image. So you don't have to do it exactly at the same time I'm doing it, because I know that that's like kind of hard to do. And yeah, I am recording, so thank you for double checking with me on that one. But yeah, so you can use one of the images to choose after this. I'm going to give everyone at least 20-30 minutes to basically start working on it, just so that you can get a feel for how to actually do things in terms of modeling, and also so you can ask me questions right here in class, since I know some things will come up, and I can hopefully answer those questions for you. So yeah, so that's how we're going to be going about this here. So right here I have opened up Cinema 4D, and first thing that I'm going to do in this case here is I'm actually going to change my layout inside of Cinema 4D. So I have mentioned this once or twice before, but inside of Cinema 4D there are different layouts that you can use to help optimize your ability to work on different aspects inside of Cinema 4D. Yep, I am recording. Thanks for double checking. So these will basically sort of make certain elements come up into the forefront, rather than being tucked away in all these different menus where you have to sort of know where things are specifically in order to use them. So right up here at the top, hopefully you can see this, is the layout option, and I'm going to click the drop down and switch to the option for model. You can see here that I have a couple other ones that are custom that I've made myself, and other ones that we can use for different things. But today all we're worrying about is the model mode. So now that we've switched into our model mode here, you'll notice that there are more items that are down here at the bottom, and these are the different tools that we're going to be using to create our model inside of Cinema 4D. Most of these aren't active right now because we don't have anything to model with in our scene, but we will be able to have access to all of these different tools. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to navigate on my Explorer here into my folder that I'm going to use for my images here. So let me just find this folder, and let me bring it up on the screen so that you all can see what I have here. Alright, so this is my folder here that I have with the Scarecrow. So if you've downloaded these from the web, you can have access to the same ones as well. So the class chose, or most of the votes went to number 2 here. So that's what we're going to work with here. Of course, when you're doing this, you can feel free to choose any one of these to work with. Some of these are more straightforward to work with than others. I think probably the first one is the easiest one, and then sort of the ones after that are probably a little bit more intricate to work with. But we're going to be working with number 2. So what I'm going to do just to start off here is I'm actually going to save my project in the place that I want to actually be working at, just to sort of get ahead of the game and put this in the right place. So just gonna save my file. So number 2 underscore 01. All right, so that's just so that when I do add everything in here, hopefully it'll stay together here. So first things first is I want to bring in my Scarecrow image as a reference image inside of Cinema 4D. So when you do have your reference images of your choice or your own sketches or what you find on the web, bringing them inside of Cinema 4D is going to be a really handy tool to use. Of course, you can bring these on an image, which hopefully everyone now understands that you can add images to materials and sort of adjust them on planes. But for the sake of modeling, there's a different way that you would do this so that it actually comes up in our viewport directly. So first things first is I'm going to hit the middle mouse button in order to see my 4-panel layout, which if you don't have that button, you can always come up to the top right here and sort of click this icon to see your multiple viewport layouts. And I'm actually going to work in my front view because my image that I have here is from the front. If it was from the side, it might make more sense to work from the side, and if it was from the top, which normally you don't work that way, but you can also put it on the top view as well. But for the sake of what we're doing here, I'm going to be putting it on the front view here. Now what I'm going to go to here is I'm actually going to go into my settings for my viewport here in order to add the image into my viewport for viewing. Normally I would hit shortcut buttons to do this, but you can actually access this by going to the mode option here and going into view settings. There's a bunch of different options here, and a lot of these will get you to similar places, but view settings is usually the quick and easy one to sort of remember. Now that we're in the view settings here, you should see that all this is what you would expect, that we're in the front view. It's linked to a camera, which is sort of the default C4D front view camera, not one that you're actually controlling. So you pretty much don't have to touch anything here. Where we're actually going to go to is our back option over here. So over here, you can see that there are a number of different tabs, and specifically we're going to go into the back selection tab here. And what this is going to allow us to do is to load an image to our viewport for viewing. And this is what we're going to be using to model the body of our Scarecrow character here. As you might have noticed, there's an image field here where we can actually add our image, and I believe I could actually just add this, well, Scarecrow 2 into the field here, and you're going to see that it pops right up into my scene here. Of course, if you're more comfortable with going through the ellipses, then you can go that way and navigate it to it on your system. Turn this down a bit, and that'll work just as well. Now, you'll notice that right now, there's a white sort of background on this, and that's sort of by default because Cinema 4D doesn't know how to automatically at least read the alpha mode. Excuse me. So the only thing that we need to make sure to do in this case here is to come down here to our alpha mode option all the way down here and make sure to choose the drop down for normal. And because I made my image with an alpha transparent background inside of Photoshop, I believe, or maybe Illustrator, now you can see through our actual object in our scene. And there's other options that you can play around here, such as repositioning it in your scene, changing the sizing. You can do a lot here in terms of repositioning it. And of course, there's also the option to adjust the transparency. So when we're modeling, if we want to see more of our object and less of our reference image, we can control this slider here in order to adjust that. So that's how we load in our reference image here. So again, in order to add this image in, I clicked middle mouse on my screen, or I went to the option to see my 4-panel layout, and then I went into my front view. And then once I was in my front view and had it loaded, I went to mode, view settings, and then usually it starts you off here, and then I navigate it to the back tab, and then in the image drop down, I loaded in my image that I want to use as reference. So if I wanted to use a different Scarecrow image, I would use that one. If I wanted to use number 4, I could add that one into my scene. And I can add it in my original one here. You know, and then of course you can also adjust the offset as well. So you might notice if we zoom in really close here that our Scarecrow image, the way that we did it inside of our 3D program isn't exactly perfect. So I didn't, or inside of Photoshop wasn't exactly perfect. So if you come in here and you do notice that you do want to adjust the offset a little bit to try to make it a bit more center, you can do it this way as well. It doesn't have to be perfectly centered because it's up to you to sort of adjust both of the sides accordingly. But if you wanted to be perfect, the number that I seem to put here, we'll just call it an even -4, is what I adjusted my offset. So if your imported image isn't perfect, like mine isn't here, feel free to adjust the offset or just leave it as is and just work around it. That's what I did the first time I created this, but we live and learn and we can adjust for the next time that we do things. Okay, awesome. So now that we have our image in our scene here, and if I click the 4-point view, you'll notice that it's not in any of the other views, and that's by design because we would have to load an image individually into the top and the right. It doesn't work for the perspective view. You can see that since I still have the viewport settings up and I click the back tab, everything's grayed out here because you can't really add an image in perspective view, or at least not in the same sort of way. We could add a background, which was being asked of earlier today, but that wouldn't necessarily work as well for a reference image. So clicking middle mouse, jumping back into my front view here. Now I want to actually get into modeling my character here. So the way that I'm going to start off my modeling here is just adding a cube in my scene. Just like that. So one click, adding a cube in my scene. So this is what is going to be the start of my Scarecrow character here. Now, once you have this in here, there's a couple of things that we're going to do in order to make it easier for us to create the main body of our Scarecrow here. First thing I'm going to do is over in the object properties is I'm going to add some segments of detail here. So right now, it's just a cube and it's one polygon face for each side of the cube. And to confirm this, we're going to go to display up here at the top, and we're going to make sure that we're in our shading with lines mode. So hopefully you can notice that now we can actually see the edges of our cube here, which have this black sort of line on them. It may be a bit hard to show on the screen here, but hopefully zooming in is at least making it a little bit more apparent. And now that we have this in here, I'm going to just add some more segments. So 2 by 2 by 2. And now you'll see that we have more of a division of our cube in our scene here. So this is going to be the first start of being able to add more geometry to our cube, because essentially every time we add additional segments to our cube, we're adding geometry, faces, polygons to our cube that we're going to later on manipulate and shape into the form of our Scarecrow. So now that we have this in here, we're going to use a tool that we have used before, and that's going to be to make our cube editable. So up here at the top left, there is the make editable button. Also, the shortcut is C for this. Hopefully you guys are aware of this. So I'm going to click that, and now nothing much happened other than we lost the ability to automatically size our cube. But what we gain from this is the ability to choose an option on the left side here that's going to allow us finer control of our model. So over here, we have different modes, and we actually have talked about this points mode because we've been using that to adjust splines, but we haven't really talked about edges or faces, which is what we're going to be getting into here. And polygon faces is what I mean when I'm saying just faces in this instance here. So for now, actually, I think what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to go into points mode. And now you can see that we can actually click the different points on our cube, and we can actually move these around and shape these. And this is how we're going to be controlling the shape of our Scarecrow's main body here in order to shape it into the form that we want it to be. I'm going to hit Control Z a couple times to undo to get back to where I started from. But that's what we're going to be using now in order to manipulate and shape our main shirt body of our Scarecrow. But before we get too much into that, we're going to do a couple things that is going to make this a lot easier to manipulate. Now, so far, this cube is in the middle of our scene, which means that for the most part, it's going to be pretty much a mirror image on both sides, and we want to keep that in mind when we're modeling our character, because it's going to actually require us to do less work on our character. Because our character is pretty symmetrical on both sides, except for the hat at the top, we can take advantage of this in our modeling techniques. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to come up here to the top to our live selection tool and hold on it, and I'm actually going to choose the rectangle selection tool. Now the shortcuts for this, I believe, is 9 and 0 on the keyboard, so you can actually swap back and forth between those. So if I hit 0, it's going to go to the rectangle selection tool. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to drag select all the points on the right side of our cube here. And having that in mind, I'm going to double check that this feature over here, and I'm going to zoom in, is actually turned off. Depending on what your defaults are, this might actually be on, but I want to make sure that this is off, because if I have this on, it's only going to select what's viewable in the front view here, and it's actually not going to zoom in and select everything that's on the back of our cube, which is a mistake that I've made plenty of times in modeling. So drag select, making sure that only select visible faces is off, and I'm going to hit delete. So now I have half of my cube in my scene, which is exactly what I want, because I'm going to come up top here to my generator objects, and I'm actually going to add a symmetry in my scene. So by default, it's not going to know what it's actually going to be mirroring or creating a symmetrical version of, but if I select the cube, left click, hold on it, and hold it on top of the symmetry object, and then once it shows me the down arrow, I'm going to release it. Now you're going to see that I have a perfect mirror copy from the left to the right of my cube. So again, I added symmetry object into my scene, and this is also in the menus and create generator symmetry. And then I'm going to select my cube, hover on top of the symmetry object, and release. And now I have a perfect mirror on the left to the right. And if I were to come into here, into my front view, and select the points that are in the middle of my cube, I can slide this to the left, and you can see that it's also moving everything onto the right. So we don't have to adjust both sides at the same time. We can just adjust the left, and it'll automatically adjust on the right. Now that we have this symmetry object in our scene, the last thing that I want to do is I want to add something that's going to smooth out my cube. Initially, it's going to make things too smooth, but I'm going to show you how to add more detail to your object. But this is going to be a key thing to keep in mind, because depending on the style of the character that you're creating, unless you're creating sort of a low poly character, you're probably going to want your character to have at least a little bit of smoothing edges around it, especially since most things in life are not perfectly sharp. So the other object that we're going to add in here, and it's going to be from the same menu, is called subdivision surfaces. So I'm going to add that into my scene, and just like before, I'm going to select the symmetry object, drag it on top of the subdivision surface, and release it. And now you're going to see that our cube smooths out and has nice smooth edges around the sides here. So this is going to be how we're going to add some smoothness to our cube. And you might have seen right now that I just sort of flash between the smooth and the cube really fast, and that's using the shortcut key Q on the keyboard. You can also come up here and click the enable and disable. It does the same sort of thing. So Q is a really fast shortcut for visualizing how your model's actually going to look in the end. So really something handy to keep in mind, because you might design everything perfectly for this sort of square polygon basic mode, but always keep in mind that you're probably going to smooth your object at the end. And sometimes you may not want to work with the symmetry, so you might want to turn that off on the side as well. So making sure to save my scene here. Now we're actually going to get into the different techniques that you can use to actually form and shape your character here. So let me take a quick sip right here. And we will continue on here. And again, if anyone has any questions while I'm going through this, please feel free to ask them or drop it in the chat. I'll make sure to check there to see if anyone has any questions, or if I'm going a little bit too fast or a little bit too slow. I will try to keep that in mind here. But now that we have our cube, our half cube in our scene, we have our symmetry, and we have our subdivision surfaces, we're going to start to manipulate and move our points around in 3D to at least create the front outline of our Scarecrow's main body here. There is, the Z depth that we will have to worry about eventually, but for right now, we're just worrying about getting this to shape in the front of our character here. So what I'm going to start to do is just come into here, and I'm still on the rectangle selection tool just because I can grab multiple points at the same time. And I'm just going to drag this down to the bottom of the shirt here. And I'm going to do a similar thing with the top here. I'm going to drag it to sort of the top part of the shirt. And this middle part here, because I know have a little bit of foresight here, I think I'm actually going to drag this to the bottom of the arm here, because eventually I'm going to need to figure out some way to actually pull out pieces of geometry in order to create the arm here. But just to start here, we're going to create the main sort of body shape of our shirt here. And what we can do is we can click Q in order to see, sort of how the shaping of our body is actually going. And it doesn't need to be perfectly shaped yet. We're going to get to that in a second here. But looking at the front here, we can see that the point for the bottom of the shirt is actually a little bit above here. So we can actually drag select this point, move it up a little bit, and sort of see where it's going to be. Now, of course, when we're hitting the Q key, we can see that it's still not keeping in line of where we want it to be. So what I'm going to show you is actually how to make cuts or add more definition in your model in order to control your edges here. Now there are a couple different ways that you can do this. There's about 3 different tools that are right here on the toolbar that you can use. So let me zoom in here and I can show you what these are. So the first one we have here is line cut. The second one is plane cut. And then the third one here is the one that I probably use the most, is the loop path cut tool. So all 3 of these tools are what you can use in order to basically cut into your 3D model. So I'm going to actually choose the loop path cut tool. And you're going to see that it's going to change our menu over here for our attributes. And you can also get to this menu by right clicking and actually choosing loop path cut there as well, but I switched to the model and layout purely for visual purposes so you can see this. And now I'm going to hover over the main body of my figure here, and I'm going to try to put another line. And this, just so you can visualize this is actually wrapping fully around the 3D object that we have here. So it's going from the front to the back because we want it to go evenly around our object here. And I'm just gonna add a line and just left mouse click. And now when I hit the Q key or turn on the subdivision surface here, you can see that now I have a bit more definition where my bottom of my geometry of my shirt actually goes. So you can see here that using this technique, we can actually add more and more definition to our shape here. So if I wanted this to be a little bit more defined, and I'm undoing here, maybe I put it closer to the bottom just to see how much more accurate it actually makes it. So now if I look over here from the side, you can see that it's more of a sharper sort of bevel edge at the bottom here compared to what it was before. And of course you can go through this and add as much definition as you want in order to sharpen this edge. And if we turn back on our symmetry object, we can see that now we have the main part of the body of our shirt here, at least from the front view. The side view still needs some work. So you can see it there. That's where we can start to actually adjust the points or adjust the definition on our character's body here. So this is a process that you're going to be using probably a lot in order to add more definition. So for example, if we want to say pull in the middle part of our chest here from the side, we could, making sure that we have the loop path cut tool selected, come up to maybe around here, click, and that's going to add a new point for us. And then I'm going to go back into my rectangle selection tool, drag select all the points on the side here. So again, I'm not just selecting the front point, I'm selecting all the points, which is actually 3. And then I can bring this in just a little bit to sort of shape the body of my scarecrows here. So again, just from the front view here, but you can start to see that we're actually getting closer to the outline form that we have here. Now, of course, this doesn't have to be perfect, and by the end of this won't be a perfect one-to-one representation, but at least you can start to see how we're going to form this. Now, so far, we've been working mainly just on setting up the definition of our character, but of course, we're going to actually want to add to our geometry here, or to pull out different pieces in order to extend what's already existing here. So this is actually going to be called extruding our object. So we're actually going to extrude or pull out different parts of our geometry, or specifically we're going to be pulling out polygon faces in order to extend our geometry in one way or the other. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to now switch to the polygon mode. So over here on the left, I'm going to switch to polygon modes out of line mode. And I'm actually going to switch into my live selection tool. And in the 3D view here, I actually want to select the side where the arms are actually going to be pulled out. So of course, if we were to pull this right now, it pulls everything, which isn't necessarily what we want. We actually want to pull these two faces out of this and actually extend them. So what we're going to be using to do this is called the extrude tool. So down here at the bottom, there's an option called extrude. And then this also can be accessed from the right click menu, extrude up here. And you'll notice that there are shortcuts for all of these. So if you do get really good at this and you want to know the faster ways of doing things, all the shortcuts are easily accessible. But for the sake of this, we're going to come down here and click on the extrude selected. And this is going to put us into the extrude mode. And now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to extrude these faces out in order to create the arm. So clicking into the front view here. Now you can do this a number of different ways. You can click on the face and pull to the left and right, or you can click into the space around it and pull left and right. You could even mess with these numbers over here and offset them here and hit apply at the bottom. But for the sake of visuals, I'm going to click inside the area here with both of these faces selected, and then I'm going to drag to the right in order to pull out these points. So again, I'm going to select both of these faces, going to come down to the extrude selected, and this time I'm actually going to click in the open space and drag to the right in order to extend the upper shoulder part out of the body. So I'm just going to go to the wrist here because I think I'm going to create another part for the sort of extended part here. And now if I hit Q, you'll see that now we have what's starting to look like the upper T of our shirt body here. There still can be a lot of definition added here in order to keep our shape, as we've seen before, but at least now we're actually starting to get sort of the shapings of our body. And what I'm going to do again is I'm going to make sure that my extrude is selected. And again, I'm going to pull out in space in order to create the next segment of our arm here. So just like that, we've created what's the beginnings of our actual arm shape that we're going to be using for our Scarecrow's main body here. Now that we have this, it really just comes down to defining the shape of our character and sort of shaping it to our liking. So if I come out of my extrude tool here and go to the live mode, there's a bunch of different ways that you can do this. Some people like working with polygon faces and manipulating things that way. Some people like going to the points mode and manipulating that way. And some people like going to the edge mode and sort of manipulating the edges that way. Any of these ways is perfectly acceptable. It's kind of like up to your workflow and how you sort of visualize things. I like working in points mode just because I can visualize the different points in 3D space, but I know that that's not always the case for everyone, so I encourage you to find what works best for you in this case. But to show something different, I'm going to go into the edge mode, and I'm going to select this ring of edges, which is more or less the wrist area here, and then I'm going to go into the scale tool, and pushing in here a bit, I'm going to pull down this to make it a little bit more narrow with the actual shape of my arm here. So now if I hit the Q key, you can see that this is a little bit more shapely than what I had before. And I'm actually going to repeat this process with the edge of the sort of shirt wrist area here and pull down the faces here. So of course, when we hit Q, you'll notice that this isn't a perfect representation, and that's because, like before, we would need to add loops of geometry of edges in order to shape our figure towards the way that we actually want. So again, I would come over to the loop path cut, or actually let's try a different one. Let's try the line cut tool, and you can see how this works. So this works similar to the loop path cut, but only in the fact that it just cuts along a line that you're cutting into your geometry. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that right now, like I mentioned before for a different tool, it's only on visible only. So right now, if I look at this in 3D, I actually only cut through the front faces here, which isn't going to do me any good. So let me undo what I just did there, save, and turn off visible only. So now if I were to say drag a line down the top to the bottom, and I'm actually holding shift on my keyboard to make sure that it stays straight. Now if I look at my scene, I can see that it actually cut through my full object. And if I were to hit Q, now you can see I have a bit more definition, and this part, at least at the end, matches a bit closer to my actual reference image here. And I could do the same similar thing going down here, clicking the knife tool, releasing it, and now if I hit Q, you can see that the shape of my wrist area here is a bit more in line with the actual reference image that I'm using here. And this is the process that I would go through and continue in order to create the shape of the body here. So again, right here we can see that the chest area here, and just to visualize this, I'll put this in this mode. The chest here is actually a bit further out in the armpit area here than we would probably like. So using the loop path cut tool, I can come over here and make another cut. And now I can see that it pulls in a little bit closer into the actual body here. Now, this might actually be too much, but that's okay, because if this is too much for our personal liking, we can actually switch back into our, I'm going to go into my point mode here, switch into our rectangle selection tool, and I can select these points and actually adjust these. So something that I do sometimes is I select them before they're disabled or before our subdivision surface is actually on. Then I hit Q to turn it back on, and then I move my points around in order to figure out where I actually want them to be once it's actually smoothed. That way when it's smooth, I can see that it's actually closer to the area that I actually want to be. And I could do this again if I zoom in really tight here, select just the top corner points here, hit Q, zoom back out, and I could move these points up in space in order to position this better along the actual curvature. And sometimes you might want to move the inside points along the same path just to keep it consistent. Sometimes you might not want to. It depends if your design is going to be more asymmetrical or more symmetrical. It kind of depends on what you have in mind. But just like that, you can see that we're starting to actually get the outline of our figure here. Now, it's still a little bit too thick in the Z here. Now, of course, this is where it would be really handy to have a reference for the side of your image, which you would put into your right, or if you were to change this, your left view. But we don't have an image there, so we would just have to envision, in our mind, where this actually, or how thick this actually would be. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to drag select everything in my right view, or you could do, I believe you could just do Control A in this case. And again, I have my cube selected here. So, and I'm actually going to name this shirt just to keep it consistent so I understand what it is. And I could simply come up here to the scale tool and push it in on the Z axis to grab all these points together. And now you can see that now we're starting to get something that more represents what I think, in my mind at least, would be sort of the thickness of a shirt on a Scarecrow that might be out. Now, this isn't perfect because I don't have a perfect, reference image, or I don't have another image up, but you can sort of, use your mind's eye to sort of decide what the thickness is, or maybe you like it being really thick. I don't know. It's kind of up to you. But I'm just going to keep it sort of around here, just so that it's a bit more to my personal liking. And I'm going to make sure to go back to the live selection tool and click on the outside area to deselect all the different points in my scene. So that's sort of technique, one of the techniques that you can use towards modeling the main body figure of your character. We learned to extrude points on our geometry here. So if I wanted to continue to extrude different points, I could come back over here and continue extruding this out if I wanted to. If I wanted to add more definition, I could use one of these tools at the bottom in order to add definition to our scene, or add definition to our model. And of course, we can come into our model itself directly and select different points that we wish to manipulate. And I've been using the rectangle selection tool so that I can select a row of points together in order to move them in 3D space. Of course, if you wanted to be really precise, there's nothing stopping you from using the live selection tool and selecting the individual points, maybe holding the shift key and selecting multiple points at the same time. That's also a similar process, although it's a little bit more work or more time consuming. So using those three sort of techniques or three different tool sets, you're able to sort of start to form the main body of our character here. So if I hit Q, we can look at this in our perspective view here, and we can start to see that this is going to be the beginnings of our Scarecrow character. And we can come in here and continue to add more definition as we see fit. So maybe we want to add the little sort of indent here to where the shirt part actually goes. So if I wanted to do that, instead of making a loop path cut along the x-axis, I could do it along the y-axis. And what I think I'll do before I give everyone a chance to try this out themselves and to have a little bit of a break here, we're going to use maybe the plane cut tool, and we'll see how this works. This is another tool that you can use to cut different objects, and right now it's set to free cut, which will work, but it's a bit sort of hard to work with in this regard. Is we're actually going to change the mode that this plane is actually cutting on towards the y-axis. So right now it's on free, so what we probably want to actually do is switch this to either local, world, or camera. Local would be the object, world would be your scene, and then camera is from the viewpoint of your actual camera. And you can play around with these and see which ones work better, but I'm going to put this on local, and then I'm going to hover my line over my model, and you can see that right now it's trying to cut it along the x-axis, the lengthwise, and I actually want it to be up and down. So let's try a different one. Let's try YZ. Okay, so it looks like YZ is going to be the axis this is going to cut on, which actually is going to give us the definition that we actually want, because I want to be able to dip the inside of our shirt here at the top. So I'm actually going to come over to where I think the top part of the shirt's sort of indent is going to be, add a loop cut or a plane cut, and then I'm going to come into my perspective view to just double check that it cut all the way around, which it did. And then I'm going to switch back to my rectangle selection tool, and for the sake of making this a little bit easier, I'm actually going to turn down the transparency of my model here. And then I'm going to drag select all the points at the top of my model. So again, if we look at the top, selecting all the points at the top here, and we're just going to drag this down here. So now if I hit Q, you can see that now we have at least a little bit of an indent for where, you know, our neck or our head is going to begin to form for our character here. Of course, we can come in and maybe make some cuts to actually cut out this area if we needed it to be open. But for the sake of what we're doing right now, we can just sort of leave it as is. So there we've shown you, or I've shown you another way that you can use one of these cut tools. And there are other tools here that we can manipulate and use. Some of these we'll get into maybe in the next lesson, but for now you can see that just using these couple tools, we're able to form this geometry and shape it to our liking based off of our reference image that we were able to import by adjusting the view settings back option. And we used the Scarecrow 2 in order to use that as a reference image to shape our character inside of 3D. And now that we have this here, you know, We can go crazy with it and add different materials. We could even add materials for specific parts of our geometry, which if people are interested in that, that's something I can show you as well. But yeah, so this is really the main crux of this technique of modeling. Some people call this the box modeling technique in terms of 3D. I'm sure there are plenty of other different names. If anyone knows any other names of this, please feel free to share it out. But this is going to be what I'm going to give everyone some time to actually get into and actually sort of try this yourselves. I know this can seem a little bit sort of abstract, just sort of watching it being done, especially since you don't know all the sort of commands and stuff. So I really do want everyone to get a chance to actually play around with this and actually do this yourselves so that it's not super foreign. And again, you're gonna have 2 weeks essentially to develop this character. So this week is going to be sort of designing the look of it. But of course, if you want to get a head start on it, or if you even want to use what we're doing in class as sort of the basis for your model, that's totally cool as well.